Our speaker today is Gene Dodaro, the 8th Comptroller General of the United States. And it's a real pleasure for me to introduce him because Mr. Dodaro is the head of the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, once known as the General Accounting Office. And it's a pleasure for me because I personally have had extensive connections with the GAO over the years. And it's an organization that I promote enthusiastically. And if you were in my class in public financial management, you would hear me, urging you to consider jobs with the GAO. But regardless of the name, the GAO unfortunately conjures the image amongst some of a horde of Bob Cratchit-like accountants, glued to their desks, green eye shades attached to their heads, ensconced in the bowels of the government bureaucracy, ensuring that every debit is matched with an equal, with a corresponding credit. And of course, that would make Gene Dodaro the Ebenezer Scrooge of the federal government. But such is hardly the case. The LBJ school is decidedly policy-oriented. But it's no stretch to say that unless President Obama is going to be our spring commencement speaker, Comptroller General Dodaro will have more impact on government policy than virtually any other visitor to the LBJ school this year. Each year, the GAO issues close to 600 written reports, and it testifies at approximately 150 congressional hearings. Each addresses ways in which the government can be made more efficient and effective. Go to the website of the GAO and put in the search term Afghanistan, and something like 1,033 reports will be cited. Put in Affordable Care Act, and there are close to 4,000 citations. And for each dollar budgeted, the GAO recommendations save the government. For each dollar of its budget, the GAO recommendations will save the federal government more than $100. So, Comptroller General Dodaro was nominated for his position by a committee of Congress. He is appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. He serves a term of 15 years. Not quite as good as tenure, but pretty close. The GAO is part of the legislative branch of the government. It's non-political and non-partisan. It's often referred to as the watchdog of Congress. And that means that Comptroller General Dodaro has 435 bosses, none of whom, or I should say many of whom, see eye to eye on very many issues. And this suggests that Mr. Dodaro himself must have pretty keen political instincts. Mr. Dodaro graduated from Lycoming College. He spent virtually all of his career at the GAO. And I believe that you're the first Comptroller General to have been appointed from within the agency itself. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. And needless to say, he's received all sorts of honors and awards. So it's my pleasure to introduce Comptroller General Dodaro.
Thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be here to spend some time with you to talk about the work that we do at the GAO. I appreciate the introduction. I think it's the first time I've ever been potentially linked with Ebenezer Scrooge, except when my kids want money. Maybe that's another occasion. At GAO, we exist. The reason we were founded in 1921 and why we continue to exist today is to help support the Congress in carrying out their constitutional responsibilities and to help improve the performance and enhance the accountability of government for the benefit of the American people. Now, when we talk about Congress's constitutional responsibilities, we talk about legislating laws that sort of govern the rules and regulations on how the federal government regulates the economy, individual programs that provide services to people throughout the country, how they appropriate money and decide how to allocate resources to the various programs and activities. The scope of GAO's work is the entire breadth and scope of the federal government. So we do everything from defense work to healthcare work, transportation, the environment, natural resources and the environment, you name it, we do reports on that. We do work for virtually all standing committees of the Congress and about 70% of the subcommittees. So we get into virtually all aspects of the federal government's operations. As Dr. Granoff mentioned, we issue hundreds of reports every year. A lot of our work, we produce a strategic plan for serving the Congress, and we try to identify what the most important national issues are. Just to give you some examples of what we're currently working on now, and for national security purposes, we're still looking at the drawdown in Afghanistan. We're looking at how the federal government's been training security forces in Syria, some of the rebels, to fight those activities. Until recently, we had an office established in Kabul until the United States withdrew from Afghanistan. When we were in Iraq, we had an office in Baghdad. So we look at, wherever the federal government's money is being spent. Now, we're asked to look at sanctions that we have against North Korea and Iran, and are the sanctions working properly. We look at military readiness. This is a big effort. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have taken a terrible toll on the military. So it's really important that we look at how we're equipping and training our workforces of the future. We've done a lot of work on implementing of the Affordable Care Act. That's been the biggest changes to health care in the last several decades. We have a high-risk list that we keep for the Congress. We renew it at the beginning of each new Congress. And we identify, looking across the entire federal government, what some of the highest risk areas are. For example, in our last update earlier this year, 2015, we added healthcare services for our veterans. Our veterans are not getting timely and quality health care. The Veterans Administration was unprepared for the large number of people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and particularly also with the aging of some of our veterans from the Korean Wars and the Vietnam Wars. And so it's a big problem, and we put them on the list. We had over 100 recommendations that they hadn't implemented yet to improve services to veterans, and there were some very unfortunate circumstances that occurred as a result of that. The other thing we have on the high-risk list is oversight of federal food and medical products and safety in the United States. For example, most people don't know that 80% of the ingredients of prescription drugs that all of us use in the United States come from foreign manufacturers, 40% of finished drugs. About 15% of our food supply now comes from other countries. In some areas like seafood and vegetables, it's 60–80% of that. But our regulatory structures to oversee safety for food and medical products were set up to oversee domestic production in the United States, not global production. And so we've made a number of recommendations to the Congress to move toward a more risk-based approach, where we're reaching agreements with other countries on the regimes they use to oversee the production of food and also medical products. This is just not drugs, it's medical devices like pacemakers and other things. About half of those come from foreign sources as well. So we're in a global marketplace right now, and same thing's true in the capital markets. The global financial crisis occurred. We issued a report and put on a high-risk list in 2009 the need to reform our financial regulatory structure. Nobody was looking at systemic risk across the banking sectors. Of course, we had credit markets seize up in 2008, 2009. We had hundreds of billions of dollars that we used to bail out the banks, get them back, so we had liquidity in the market. And we pumped about $800 billion in money to stimulate the economy and various programs. We evaluated all of that activity as well. And in the global financial markets, now I've set up a group of 25 different countries to oversee implementation of the financial regulatory reforms that were agreed to by the G20 in order to make sure the banks are better capitalized, they can withstand shocks. But we need to do it around the world because capital will move to the lowest level of regulatory oversight. And it's really unfair. And while the problems in 2008 started in the United States, in prior global financial crises that started in Asia, in some cases in Sweden and Mexico, and prior banking crises. So the next one could occur anywhere in the world. So I'm working with our counterparts in other countries to set up global monitoring systems. And so some of the work we do, for example, in the Arctic Council recently, where with changing climate, the ice is melting, it's opening up sea lanes, but it's also causing a lot of environmental dislocation. You know, we all, through paying taxes, now we're paying to move the whole villages in Alaska that have become underwater or will become underwater because of this change. And so there's a lot of environmental issues. The Arctic Council is a group of about 8 countries now, Russia, Norway, the United States, Sweden, Finland, Canada, and they're reaching agreement on the international organization level to help with these environmental concerns in the Arctic, and also to open up lanes for commercial use. There that heretofore were frozen and not passable. Now that they're able to do this, it will lead to the creation of other economic development. So we work, my counterparts actually started with Norway and Russia contacted me and wanted to do a joint effort where we each evaluate our country's contributions to the Arctic Council, and we issued a report. I just give you that as an example of other things that we're doing on a global level now. As Michael mentioned, our name when we first started was the General Accounting Office, and now it's the Government Accountability Office. I kid the staff at the GAO, by the time my tenure ends, we're going to be the Global Accountability Office. So we're doing a lot of those efforts. I'm also trying to help build the capacity of national audit offices in other countries because we send a lot of foreign aid to other countries, but we're not really always sure that it's going for the right purposes for social and economic development, to alleviate poverty in other cases. So one way to help ensure that is to build up the audit organizations in those countries that can oversee the effectiveness of that information. We're also evolving continually in GAO to meet the needs of the Congress. When we were first created in 1921, it was after the First World War. And the United States government had borrowed huge amounts of money, and at that time, the president didn't even submit a budget to the Congress. It was created by the Congress, and so the law that created what's now the Office of Management Budget and the Executive Office of the President. It took GAO out of parts of the executive branch and put it in the legislative branch, required the president to submit a budget. So it reformed how the federal government manages finances because we had this huge debt after the war. So at that time, people were, our job was to look at vouchers before they were paid. Of course, in those days, we only had 4 departments and agencies in the federal government. And so as the government grew, we became more into program evaluation. The War on Poverty, of course, all of you know the role LBJ played in the War on Poverty, Great Society program, but it greatly expanded the federal government's activities, and people wanted to know how those programs work. So we moved from a financial auditing organization into program evaluation. 95% of the reports we issue every year are performance audits on how programs and policies are working. We do audit the financial statements of the federal government, but it's a small part of what we do. We have 3,000 people. We have about 240 financial auditors. Okay? Most of our other people are public policy experts in different subject areas across the federal government. We have economists, we have lawyers, we have actuaries, we have information technology specialists, and we also have a group. I'm trying to evolve GAO to do more work in the science and technology area. So we have a chief scientist now. A lot of the work we're asked to do, looking at weapons systems over at the Department of Defense, we evaluate their cost estimates, their testing, of weapon systems, whether we're talking about aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, the Joint Strike Fighter, which is the big new airplane, the most expensive weapon system in the United States history. We're asked to look at satellite systems. You know, federal government invests a lot in satellites. One of the areas on our high-risk list is the environmental satellites that we have now on both the polar orbiting satellites that give data for the 3 and 5 and 7 day forecast. And then there's geostationary satellites that give information on tornadoes and more short-term effect. The federal government hasn't managed effectively a new generation of satellites, so there's going to be a potential gap in satellite coverage, which means we may not be able to get timely weather reports and data. And this would be a real problem in storms. When Superstorm Sandy was coming up the coast, East Coast several years ago, actually European satellite system said it was going to hit our coast, but our data said it wasn't. And then eventually we changed the forecast, and people were able to be warned in time to be able to move out. So if you don't have good weather data, you have to put life, property, and economic development at risk of not being able to warn people. So we're looking at these satellite systems, and we're asked to do technology assessments of different technologies. We've done work recently on nano-manufacturing technology. This is technology that will change a wide range of industries. In medicine, for example, we're experimenting with technologies that would just treat cancerous cells and not have effect on healthy cells, so that people wouldn't have the byproducts of getting chemotherapy treatment, losing their hair and their dignity and other things. And the United States has pumped about $20 billion into the development of nanotechnology, but we're not taking the research and development efforts and quickly moving them to market so that we get the advantages of this investment in technology. I just give you these as some examples. We're looking at climate engineering technologies. We're looking at technologies for water development. We did a survey of 50 states, water experts and managers. 40 of the 50 states in the United States expect a water shortage in the next 10 years. And I know things are tough here in Texas and California now, but it's going to become a broader problem because of changes in climate. I added limiting the federal government's fiscal exposure to climate change to our high-risk area in 2013 as a means of trying to get the federal government more organized. And the federal government is the largest property holder in the United States. 29% of the land is owned by the federal government. So we look at how the federal government manages the land and that investment. The federal government provides flood insurance. Flood insurance programs on the high-risk list. It's not actuarially sound. It's $23 billion in the hole to the Treasury Department. Crop insurance costs have doubled over the past few years because of drought conditions as well. So all these areas are within the types of things that we do at JO. This is sort of a quick tour. I want to leave a lot of time for questions on this. The skills that we look for when we hire people at the GAO are critical thinking skills. You have to learn quickly, digest large amounts of information. A lot of our people, if you work on a wide variety of different projects, you can be working in healthcare one day. If you want to work, later in a housing area or defense area or whatever, you can change subject areas and move around. You have to be able to learn new material quickly. Communication skills are paramount. We do all the great work to produce these really detailed reports, and they have to be technically sound. But when I go to testify before the Congress, you have 5 minutes to make your opening statement, convince people. We did over 1,000 reports after we established the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11 occurred. And we had thousands of recommendations, so we wanted a 10-year anniversary hearing in the Congress and how we developed that agency over time to protect our country. Not only in transportation security, in chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons coming into the country. We look at how Homeland Security protects the country that way. We also look at how we're securing nuclear materials in other countries. That's particularly important now because of a lot of the regional turmoil in the world. But when we did this testimony, we had all these material, and I got 5 minutes to kind of explain, what's happened in the last 10 years in all these different areas. So you have to be able to communicate orally and in writing, very succinctly. All of our reports have a one-page summary that says why we did, what we found, and what we recommend. And that is virtually 95% of everybody who reads our material only reads that one page, whether it's media, members of Congress, or others. Now, the staff will go behind it. A lot of people in academia will read the whole reports and other things, but if you don't have that overall message shaped properly and communicated effectively, you're missing opportunities to affect public policy. When you're there, you're dealing with members, you're dealing with staff, and I deal a lot with the executive branch, heads of cabinet, departments, and agencies. I meet with them as well because most of our recommendations are directed at them. 80% of our recommendations are adopted over a 4-year period of time. Last year, we saved the federal government over $70 billion implementing our recommendations, and about 1,200 other changes in public safety and other operations and programs that have become more efficient and effective as a result of adopting our recommendations. So with that kind of quick tour, I just want to open it up to any questions that you have about GAO or about what our government does. Or doesn't do in a lot of cases. So let me just open it up. Yes?
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the relationship between GAO and the Congress in terms of recommendations that require congressional approval since the number of passed bills has declined recently.
Right. We, our relationship with the Congress, we're in the legislative branch, as Dr. Granoff mentioned, but we're independent in the branch. Once we go through this process of appointment for the Comptroller General, it can't be removed by the President or executive branch, only impeached by the Congress. So there's a measure of independence. It's the longest term in government. So that's good at tenure, but it's, within the federal government, it's the longest term, aside from judges. And so we're independent. Now, we have a set of protocols that we work out with Congress. They'll ask us to do some work. We'll suggest work that we're going to do and see if they agree with it. Most of what we do is through mutual agreement. That is something we think is important, they think it's important, and so we do planning and a lot of iterative discussions with all the committees throughout Congress and their staffs. I meet regularly with chair and ranking members of all the committees of Congress to reach agreement on priorities of the work, areas where our recommendations haven't been adopted, and try to get them to adopt our recommendations. Most of our recommendations are directed to the executive branch agencies that are voluntarily implemented by the executive branch because they're convinced of the analysis and the merits of the recommendations, but that doesn't happen in a lot of areas. So then we'll go to the Congress. Congress will either put provisions in appropriation bills to say, okay, look, GAO's looked at this big investment you're going to make, whether it's a weapons system, satellite system, or information technology project. They don't think you planned it properly. Until you give us a better plan, you're not allowed to spend the money on that area. Or we'll ask Congress, for example, we found there's a shortage of cancer treating drugs cases. And it was because some manufacturers got involved in having safety programs. So they had to shut down their manufacturing. But they didn't have to notify FDA if they were going to have a production problem. And so all of a sudden we find there's a shortage of particularly cancer therapy drugs. People are hoarding the drugs, selling them on what they call the gray market. So this doesn't make sense. We told Congress, what you should do is pass a law and require drug manufacturers to notify FDA if they're going to have a problem. And they did. And so they know. So now FDA can go to another manufacturer and have them increase production. We can go and buy drugs in another country that we trust their manufacturing processes. So as a result, the public's better protected from these drugs. So that's how we did Congress recently to do this. I was just talking at lunch about an effort. I recently went to the Senate Finance Committee, chair and ranking member, and asked for a hearing on improper payments in the federal government and the tax gap. There's about last year $125 billion, close to 124.7, that were paid that shouldn't have been paid. They were paid the wrong amounts, or they shouldn't have been paid at all. And the amount of taxes that should be coming into the federal government revenue that aren't coming in, the last estimate is $385 billion. So that's a one-year estimate. And we've had open recommendations that the federal government allow IRS to regulate paid tax preparers. A lot of people go to tax preparer because they're afraid that they're going to make a mistake or get audited by the IRS, or they just don't know how to do it. We have estimated that that 60% of all the returns that are prepared by paid tax preparers, right, or have errors. We put together an undercover team to go in and pose as couples and individuals to 19 tax preparers to ask them, say, here's our situation, give us our tax. 2 of the 19 gave us the right answer. 7 were so wrong that it would have caused penalties for the tax preparer or them if they were discovered. So I got the hearing, I just did it recently, and legislation is now being introduced to allow IRS to regulate tax preparers. We also wanted to move the filing dates for the W-2 information. I'm sure you guys have had what jobs you have your W-2 statement, and you need that to file for your taxes. And but a lot of nefarious people are stealing identities from individuals and filing fake tax returns and getting refunds back from the IRS that are fraudulent. And the IRS doesn't get the W-2s from employers until April. So the crooks file early. And they're in there in February and March. And last year, IRS estimated it paid out $5.8 billion, $5.8 billion in fraudulent tax refunds to people, because they didn't have the ability to do the proper matching. So we're trying to get the law changed to require employers to file revenue. So that's how we kind of work. Most of the recommendations, people say, good idea, GAO, we'll implement them. Other ones, not so hot, good idea, GAO. We think it's a good idea, we go to the Congress. And then other things, only the Congress can do. And I'll go to the Congress and try to persuade them to make the changes. Yes?
I wonder, along those same lines, if you could speak to how you and the agency in general manage the relationship with the executive agencies, and how closely you work versus trying to be sort of like a separate presence.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We're trying to maintain our independence from the executive branch by trying to establish constructive engagement with them. I'll meet with every new cabinet official that's appointed or the deputy, depending on the department, top management of the agency. For areas that are on our high-risk list, I meet with the Executive Office of the President, the agency on the high-risk list, and GAO. And I've agreed that as long as they get the head of the agency or the deputy there, and I get the deputy for management and the Office of Management and Budget to participate, I personally participate in the meeting to make sure that we try to move them to fixing the areas on the high-risk list with a degree of specificity. The only thing, at the end of the day, we can't fix it for them. You can't become part of management or a management decision, but you can go a long way to giving them, your advice and specificity of what needs to be done in order to make improvements in those areas. And so, when I meet with the cabinet officials, the executive branch officials, I talk to them about our relationship. We have a set of written protocols of what we expect from them and what they can expect from us. Like for all our reports, they get a draft of our report and they comment on the report. In the beginning, we'll explain to them what our objectives are, what our methodology is going to be. They comment on that. They can get briefed anytime they want on our work as it's underway. They get to comment on the draft report, and I have an open line of communication to me. If they have any concerns about our reports, they can call me. And I'll listen to what they have to say. I mean, I agree with them, you know, but sometimes I do, and I'll listen to them. So you have to convince people you're operating in the best interest. You have no agenda other than the facts, that you're there. Our intention is to make government better. Their intention is to make it work more effectively. We have different insights. Our people will know more about holistically a program than many managers in the executive departments and agencies, because they're narrowly focused in their areas. We take a more holistic view. We can look across the entire federal government. You know, recently with all these computer hacks and break-ins, both in the public sector and private sector, you know when we designated computer security as a high-risk area across the entire federal government? 1997. I was in charge of our IT work. I said, this is a real problem. And we used to convince people we were problems. We used to break into their systems and show them how easy it was to be able to do it. So they still, you know, last year we got Congress passed 5 different pieces of legislation in the cybersecurity area. We need to do a better job in that area. But you have to maintain good working relationships with people. I've worked with administrations, Republican and Democrat, throughout the years, and always tried to have a constructive relationship. This high-risk program we started in 1990. It's the longest-running bipartisan good government effort in federal government history, and it's all been used dating back to President Clinton. All the president's management agendas have adopted parts, if not whole, high-risk areas that are on the list, so it gets their attention. Nobody likes to be on the list. They want to work their way off, but that gives you a vehicle to talk with them. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering what like the best story you have from your career that's most interesting or strangest thing you've had to deal with.
Okay, there's a lot to pick from. I'll tell you the most interesting thing to me recently what happened. This happened during the global financial crisis. You guys may remember back in 2008, actually it was March, I became acting Comptroller General in March 2008. That's when Bear Stearns was having their problems, and then Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. And the Congress in October passed the Troubled Asset Relief Program, which was $700 billion authorization to help stabilize the financial markets and inject liquidity into the system. Well, then they gave the banks a lot of money, all right? And then the automakers from the big 3 auto firms came to Washington. They said, well, we need money too. We're going to go bankrupt. Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors. And they made the mistake of flying to Washington in their corporate jets. Right? And Congress said basically, no way. We're not going to work. And then there was big concern. General Motors would go bankrupt. The federal government would have to guarantee the pension system. It's called the Pension Benefit Guarantee System. Huge pension thing. It's already heavily underwater. I mean, it's got huge exposure. All the jobs, and so people got nervous. So Congress said, look, we'll give you another chance to the automakers. You develop a plan, you come back, and we'll have another hearing in December. This was October, and they sent them back home. But we're going to have the Federal Reserve, Treasury, GAO look at your plans and advise us before we agree to give you any loans. So we got the plans on December the 2nd from the automakers. Congress had scheduled hearings on the 4th and the 5th of December. So we had, I got our team of experts together in the banking area and economists, and we sat down in a big room, we went through the plans, drafted a statement. A lot of people didn't want me to do it because they thought it was, we didn't have enough time. And I said, well, look, it's a national emergency. If we can't help during a national emergency, what good are we? So we went up there, and Federal Reserve didn't show up, Treasury didn't show up. We were the only ones to show up. And because of that, the committee wanted to put us on the panel with the automakers. I said, no. I don't want to look like I'm up there asking for money. So I said, I'll appear as a witness, but I want to be, on a panel by myself. And then you can bring up the automakers. That's what they did. And so we gave them a way, the framework to make the decision. And if they agreed that they were going to give a loan, here's what needed to be done to protect the taxpayers and the government in terms of collateral, doling out the money, and other things. So it was a pretty, it was a scary time because a lot of people thought we were entering a depression, and we were pretty close. It was pretty bad. So, but it was also at a time where you got a chance to not only deal with public policy issues, but deal with it in an economic environment where the country was at serious consequences for lots of people. And so, while Congress, the Senate passed a bill to give them loans, the House didn't, but then the Troubled Asset Relief Program gave the loans to the automobile industry, and they pretty much followed all of our recommendations. And while the federal government didn't get all of its money back, it didn't turn out anywhere near as bad as people thought it would. So that to me always sticks out in my mind as kind of a unique kind of situation. Yes.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your relationship with the other congressional agencies like CBO and CRS.
Sure. Yeah, CBO is the official scorekeeper for the federal government for budgetary purposes. They do the estimates for the Congress. At the time they were created in the late 1970s, there was a big debate whether they should be in GAO or a separate agency. And Congress went with that approach. And we've respected that ever since. Now, they also do estimates before laws are passed, as to what it will cost the federal government to implement the laws. And so we respect that and we stay out there. Our job is mostly after the law is passed, how's it working? Is it working effectively? What can be done to make it more efficient and effective? CBO has about 300 people, most of them are economists. They're all located in Washington. We have field offices throughout the country. We have 11 offices. We're 3,000 people, we're at 300. We do original audit work. We go out and actually do a lot of on-the-ground kind of examinations of what's going on. Most of the money the federal government spends is not spent in Washington. It's authorized there. It's spent out throughout the country and around the world. And so we send people wherever the money's actually spent. And so we coordinate with them. I meet with the director, CBO, on a regular basis and talk to them. CRS, similarly, smaller operation, do mostly secondary research. They're more tied with the congressional committees than we are. They're almost an extension of committee staff. In many respects, they'll help draft legislation. Their reports, if they give them to the Congress, unless the Congress decides to release their reports, they're not made publicly available. So a lot of their work never sees the public domain. All of our work is publicly released, except maybe for certain classified reports or highly classified. And even in those cases, we try to issue a public version of the classified report. So we're complementary in our skills and in our relationships, and we work together. We have coordination efforts. And just during lunch, I had the pleasure of seeing Angela Evans again, who was the Deputy Director of Congressional Research Service, and so I've known her for a long time. Yes?
You mentioned that, well, first of all, thanks for being here. And my question is, you mentioned 80% of the recommendations are implemented within 4 years. Can you talk about the other 20% and why those aren't implemented and what are those agencies or programs?
Yeah, there's a wide variety of reasons. One, it may be that the program has expired or it's no longer relevant. Right? That's one potential reason. Second reason, this is the most frequent one, is it's hard. And they don't want to do in simple technical terms, let me just say. So I'm in the process now of writing letters to all the heads of executive departments and agencies about all the open recommendations in GAO that they haven't implemented, and then I'm prioritizing ones that I think that they should personally focus on. You know, maybe the top 6 or 10, depending on the agency. And so we're, outlining how much money they can save, how much better they can protect the public, and how more efficient they could be if they implemented those recommendations. After a reasonable period, 2 to 3 weeks of giving them time to look at it, then we're giving those letters to the congressional committees as well, their appropriation committees and their authorizing committees. And so we'll have follow-up discussions with them. So I don't give up. And some of the ones, I'll give you one example of a recommendation we had for years. After 9/11, we set up the Transportation Security Agency. All those of you who've flown since then know what a pleasure it is to deal with them. But it's a necessary thing. But what we said as a policy matter is that the airlines, the airports, and the traveling public was going to pay for the additional security for the federal government, transportation security at the airports, not just the general public that was not flying, that wasn't using the services. So it was supposed to be sort of set up as a user fee kind of thing. And just like driving on the highways, you pay taxes for gasoline. It's, people who don't fund until recently were sort of funds aren't dry. But in any event, we had a recommendation because they capped the fees, the security fees. So we were using the general fund revenues to support this activity, which meant basically we're borrowing money and plus interest to pay for it. And we said that that's not the way it was supposed to work, so you ought to change the cap. Well, after it was maybe about 6 or 8 years, the team came to me and said, look, this is never going to be implemented. We'd like to just close out the recommendation and move on. And I said, no. I said, every dog has its day, and sometime that's going to come to pass. Well, last year when they did the balanced budget agreement for 14 and 15, this is after the sequestration took effect in 13, where they did the big across-the-board cut across the federal government. It caused a lot of dislocation, a lot of problems. They took and implemented the recommendation, saved $12 billion. Right? So some of this is you look for targets of opportunity to get that recommendation implemented, even though it's languishing, for a number of years. Yes, you have a question.
Yeah, you kind of talked a little bit about this, but what is the relationship like with the agencies that you actually audit or do program evaluations of? Do they have the kind of antagonistic sense that they're being audited, or is it more of a collaborative?
It's become much more of a collaborative effort over time. I make a big priority of getting to have a personal relationship with the heads of the agencies, a professional one, where I go and I talk to them, I go to their organization. I've even been asked to come and talk to different parts of the organization about what we do. I emphasize to our people that no surprises. We're very professional, very transparent with what we do, and constructive in our recommendations. Years ago, we used to be accused of pointing out problems without bringing solutions. So we really worked hard that most of our reports have recommendations where it's appropriate for us to have recommendations. Some policy analysis, we're not going to make a recommendation because it's the prerogative of the Congress, but we'll give options to the Congress. We're about ready to release a big report next week on the Social Security system, for example. And there we give options for solving the problem. Next year, the disability portion of the Social Security system will go bankrupt, and there'll only be enough revenue to pay about 81 cents on the dollar for benefits to all the people who are disabled. The main system for the old age retirement, the main Social Security system, is expected by 2034 to only have enough revenue to pay for 77 cents on the dollar. So there's a need to make changes to the Social Security system allow people time to adjust. And if we don't do something soon, the adjustments will be larger and there'll be less time to make adjustments on the system. But in that report, it's appropriate for us to lay out the options, but we don't make a specific policy recommendation. Our recommendations are in management areas or where you can save money, those type of things, we make recommendations. So typically, it's not antagonistic, but, you know, nobody likes to be audited. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, you know, the biggest joke is when the auditors come in and they say, we're here to help, and the agency says, oh, we're happy to have you. So it's all right. But if you do it in a professional way, what we've been doing, you know, you can have a very collaborative, respectful working relationship that's constructive. I've even had people thank me for putting them on the high risk list because they need help in order to fix the problem. So we have, overall, it's a very collaborative arrangement and very professional with the executive branch agencies. Yes? No.
Has the GAO had to undertake any audit processes or control processes changes similar to the public industry or public companies under Sarbanes-Oxley?
Yeah, we have an annual audit ourselves, financial audit, and we do get an opinion on internal controls like Sarbanes-Oxley. In fact, we help provide input to the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation to get the changes. We've been trying to push the federal government agencies for a long time now to get an opinion on internal controls as is required Sarbanes-Oxley, but we've been doing it voluntarily for a long time. Yes. We believe in practicing what we preach and holding ourselves accountable for the same way we evaluate others. Every 3 years, we have a peer review done by outside auditors, and since we audit all the other executive departments and agencies, including the inspectors general and the executive branch agencies, and we'll audit public accounting firms that are auditing the federal government. In some cases, other areas we'll be asked to examine it. We have a team of international auditors come in and audit us over that time. We had Canada lead it. It's a multinational group. There'll be about 6 or 7 different countries. Canada led it for a couple of years. Norway's led it a couple of times, and now Denmark is going to be leading the effort. So we hold ourselves to the same standards. Yes, you have a question.
So where do you see GA going throughout the rest of your term, and then what we might experience throughout our careers?
Well, first of all, the federal government's on an unsustainable fiscal path. Right now, debt held by the public as a percent of gross domestic product, which is sort of an international measure of your ability to repay your debt, is 74%. All right? The historic average for the last 50 years has only been 38%. So we're very heavily leveraged in debt right now. And this is coming out, we had a structural imbalance for a while now, where we have more expenditures than revenues. But during the global financial crisis in 2009, our annual deficit was $1.4 trillion, and it stayed above $1 trillion until 12. Now it's down to $426 billion for this last year. Only the federal government would say this is an improvement. Only $426 billion in debt deficit for that year. But our cumulative national debt is over $18 trillion. And so for the foreseeable future, until we reform entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and do tax reform, we're going to have a serious financial dilemma. So GAO's work is to, our highest priority is to try to get the government on a more sustainable fiscal path and to point ways where they can save money, make improvements, and then give them analysis to make these difficult policy choices. That's why I'm issuing the report on Social Security. Nobody asked me to do that. Making a little hot water, but that's why, I'm there to tell the truth, to give people the facts, not make people feel good when they shouldn't. And so that'll be a guiding principle throughout the remaining portion of my term. I mean, that's one of the reasons I stayed. I could have retired about 9 years ago, I've already been at GAO 43 years. I mean, and so, but I want this fiscal situation is not good. I don't want to leave, I'd never feel right if I left my children or my grandchildren in this kind of situation, because all we're doing is shifting this burden to future generations. You guys should care about this. I mean, you're the ones that are going to have, somebody's going to have to pay at some point in time, and it could result in a lower standard of living for our country. Secondly, I want to fix as many of these high-risk areas as we have identified. We've got 32 areas on the list. That's a big priority for our agency right now. And I'll identify new ones, if new ones need to be identified to go forward. Thirdly, I want to take us more in science and technology, because many of the solutions to our environmental problems, our energy problems, our economic development and growth in the country are rooted in innovations in science and technology, and the Congress needs an advisory capacity. So I'm building that capacity. I've got a Center for Science, Technology, and Engineering. I'm trying to expand. We have a standing contract with the National Academy of Sciences, where we can go there and get additional help, because they're a federally chartered, congressionally chartered agency, so they have a measure of independence and objectivity and professionalism that we need. I wouldn't partner with just anybody in these matters into the future. I also want to do a little bit more on financial literacy. I've always had an interest in it. During the global financial crisis, we found a lot of people made a lot of bad decisions. In taking on mortgages, there was no way they could repay. They got themselves way in debt. People aren't saving enough now. We're in our, the retirement situation, the retirement security in our country is really in difficult shape. I'm going to do the next big report on that. It's not just Social Security. Most private sector companies are no longer offering pension systems, and if they are, they're defined contributions, not defined benefits, so that more of the risk is shifting to the individuals. People aren't saving as much. We found with these studies, and we even have, there's a significant portion of people over 65 that still have student loan debt. I mean, it's from their children or from themselves that they try to retrain things. So people are, and most people haven't saved anything for retirement. And if you're counting on Social Security as your only source of retirement income, you're going to have difficulty. So people need to have more financial education so that they're empowered. People shouldn't lecture, people are going to make their own decisions, but they ought to be empowered to do this. We've done work on elder abuse now, where people are getting, our demographics are changing. Every day between now and 2029, on average, 10,000 people in the United States turn 65. Our percent of people, population over 65 is going to double from what it was in 1970. And so you have a lot of people trying to exploit the increase in the elderly population by getting them to sell their pensions to them, to getting them to give them money for security purposes, whether it's health care, life insurance, whatever. So there's a lot of problems, and so I want to try to do more in this area. Try to have outside advisors to give me advice on what we can do, because the federal government still does a lot in financial security in the agencies. I don't want to duplicate what people are doing. But the first thing I've done is try to be a model employer. We have a financial literacy program at GAO now. We bring speakers in and we connect with information. People are to help them when they make life decisions, whether they're saving money for, children's education, child support, child care is, some people spend more on child care than they spend sending their kids to college. And it's very expensive, so they need to have information about different savings options. Of course, if they get married, all the life events, buy a house, or whatever, type of things. And so those are some of the things. But ultimately, I want to leave GAO as a strong organization that's focused on the most important national issues of the country and a constructive force for making government improve government for the betterment. And I grew up in the Vietnam War, Watergate. In fact, I went to Washington during the Watergate years. It was my first exposure to the government. I never wanted to be somebody who would just sit back and complain about the government. I wanted to get involved and try to do something about it. And public services is a great profession, so I'd encourage you guys to do that at some point in your careers. Yes, you've been patient.
I hope you can fix the whole pension thing. This is scary for us. Terrified future. You mentioned, you joked with your colleagues that y'all are going to be on the Global Accountability Office. So I've been thinking about the TransPacific Partnership Agreement, and they say it's nearly 40% of the global economy. Yet the agreement has been kept secret from the public. So I'm curious to know if y'all have had a chance to look at it and asked to make recommendations, and if so, what they are.
Yeah, no, we haven't been asked specifically to look at that. Usually we will, when it gets to the Congress, we've looked at prior trade agreements. We do a lot of work on prior trade agreements, particularly whether or not other countries are adhering to the environmental provisions in the trade agreements and the human rights provisions in the trade agreements. Same thing on when we give military assistance and whether they vet it, we're giving it to people who don't have human rights violations and things of that nature. So we look at the agreements from those perspectives, usually after they're implemented, not necessarily beforehand. But Asia's growing. I mean, it's I don't know if any of you guys ever had the opportunity to visit China, but I did for the last couple of years. Had international meetings there. You go to Beijing and Shanghai, get 23 million people, both cities. I mean, huge. Makes New York City look like a small town. But Asia generally, in terms of growing economic and military power, and most of the population of the world will be in Asia in the next several years, according to projections. And so I think we have to work good arrangements. We're also looking at how the government's done what they call the Asia pivot, locating military installations and troops in different parts of Asia right now, looking at how that could be done on a sustainable financial basis over time. But so we'll see, but we haven't specifically looked at that yet. Yes.
What do you see as some of those common mistakes that new analysts make? And also, what kinds of recommendations would you give to people who are just starting out?
Well, I won't say, common mistakes, they're common ambitions people have, that they're not patient enough, is what I've seen. Usually people, when they come in, they want to know who they're going to supervise, and how quickly they're going to supervise somebody else. Nobody likes to be at the bottom. I've got I have 3 kids, so I got different sets of grandkids. My oldest daughter has 2 boys, and one 7-year-old, and there's a 3-year-old now. And the only way the 3-year-old's happy is when he's bossing the dog. and so nobody likes to be low on the totem pole, but it takes patience. So I always recommend that people have patience, perfect the craft, learn our rules of evidence, learn how to do our work, our quality assurance framework. We have a set process. We produce hundreds of reports every year in a very decentralized process. We have about 70, 80 people that sign the reports during that period of time. They testify before Congress. And so we have a quality assurance process that's been perfected over the years. Because if you make a mistake in one report, and people start questioning, well, what about the other one? Congress expects a high level of accuracy from us, so learning the fundamentals. And then we can't teach it to other people until you learn it yourself. And so that's the best advice I give people. Now, as you move up in an organization, after you master the fundamentals, you have the sort of technical grounding, and everybody has that. The distinguishing features are how well you can work with others, play nice, and work with different disciplines, and work with the agencies that we audit. It takes a while. You have to convince them that you're operating in the best interest and you're very professional. You do your homework, that you know their programs. The only thing people dislike more than being audited is being audited by somebody they don't think knows anything about the program or knows enough. So you have to convince them that, and then you gotta work with congressional committees. You know, Dr. Granoff mentioned there's 435 members in the House, another 100 in the Senate, you know, and there's congressional staff all around the country, very diverse group of people. You got to work with them, and then the ability to communicate and to impart your knowledge to other people, to develop other people. And those are the things that we look at for senior executives as we move people through the organization, is the ability to work with different disciplines, different people, and then create positive change. We don't evaluate people based on whether you issue a report or not. The evaluation is whether you created positive change in the government as a result of it, created an impact somehow, not just writing a report. And that's a vehicle to achieve change. It's not an end in itself. Yes.
You mentioned that,
Well, I'm sorry, I was pointing at John, I'm behind.
sorry.
Maureen, do you want to take this one?
She's already had one.
I had it.
I'll come back.
My question is real specific. Given the current state of the F-35 program that you referenced earlier, do you find that the GAO has more efficacy or when they're looking at program evaluation and change from going straight to the Department of Defense or going to the appropriate congressional committee like the Armed Services or the something like that?
In the defense area, you gotta go both at the same time, okay? Because in many cases, the interests are linked, right? And so you have to share it. In fact, most of our work in the defense area is included in the authorization bills every year that are passed by the Armed Services Committees, both on the House and Senate, and the Appropriation Committee. So our work is intricately linked to supporting them in making those difficult policy decisions among those areas. And the Department of Defense is very difficult to get change in place without the Congress. So that's why I mentioned before, we work with the Congress. Some cases we can't get the agency to change. The DOD is so entrenched in their bureaucracy that you got to work with Congress at the same time you work with the agency. You know, because if you don't have the Congress behind you, it's very difficult to get the department to change on their own. There, 1996, just give you one small example. 1996 was the first year all 24 major departments and agencies had to prepare financial statements and have them audited. We went 200 years in this country without that fiscal discipline. And now, 22 and 24 agencies can get clean opinions. The only major one that can is the Department of Defense, and they're not even close to having proper accounting practices over there. It's a huge operation. I mean, it's $500-600 billion, very decentralized, committed to their mission. We have the best military war fighting in the world, but their business practices are deep at best. And they get lots of money, and there's a lot of waste there. And we've had, I'd say, of the 32 areas on our high-risk list, at least 8 to 10 of them are defense-related areas. Weapon systems, contract management, inventory management, supply chain, financial management, etc.
But that financials, what by 2017?
That's the goal.
We're hoping that your visit satisfy 2 objectives. One, to convince you to seek out jobs at the GAO. And the other, to convince you that these students are worth hiring. And we've succeeded in both.
Yes, I agree. Good questions. That's what we hire people to do at GAOs. They ask good questions and get answers. So I've enjoyed spending time with all of you, and I wish you much success in your future, regardless of what you decide to do. But at some point, take up public service. You won't regret it. It's a noble profession. And government at all levels need good people. So thanks a lot. Have a good afternoon.